For faculty development program on the dynamics of research, prospects, reflection, and best practices. And today we have our resource person with us, Dr. I.G. Radish. He is an assistant professor in the Indo-University Center for IPR Studies in QUISAT. As being a teacher, he is facilitating the filing of patents among the teaching and the research fraternity. And he's serving as a coordinator of IPR facilitation cell in QUISAT. He has his PhD in chemistry with a number of publications in peer-reviewed journals. He is an expert committee member of the Kerala State Biodiversity Board and has specialized in the area of patent filing and related matters. He had worked for several MNCs in pharmaceutical companies in R&D and patent departments before joining this career in QUISAT. So today we have with us a very eminent personality who can help us in understanding the various aspects and tools of IPR in Indian context. Sir, we wholeheartedly welcome you to this session on IPR. Welcome you,
Thank
sir.
you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Thank you for the wonderful introduction and also for inviting me in sharing my knowledge on IPR in this particular forum. So quickly, I'll start sharing my screen. Give me a moment. Oh, ma'am, I think you'll have to make me the co-host. I'm not in a position
So you
to
may
share
share
my
it now.
screen.
So you may share it now.
I hope my screen is visible.
Yes.
Okay, so this is the structure of my presentation for the today's talk in the morning. So basically, whenever we talk about intellectual property, covering it in 1.5 hours is fairly not possible. But what I've done is I've condensed the matter on intellectual property, and I've focused on two major IPs in this particular session on trademark and copyright. But I'd also briefly touch upon other forms of intellectual property as well, other legal instruments. And patents, which I have an exclusive session on patents in today's afternoon session. So there I'll be discussing about patent law and practice in the context of India. So my focus is in the Indian context, specifically because the laws are rural in nature. So my focus is going to be on India. So basically my structure is going to focus on what intellectual property is. I have just a slide on that. And why should we protect your intellectual property in the first place is one of the major questions that most of us have in our mind. Quickly, then I look at the various legal instruments for IPR protection. So I have about 6 forms that I've covered over here, including the ones which I've dealt in deep before. I'll just touch upon these 6 legal instruments over there. There are other legal instruments for IPR protection as well that I'll briefly discuss in addition to these. So I'll basically cover what subject matter is protected under each IPR law in India. So different forms of IPR protection are based on or afford protection for different kind of subject matter. So we'll just quickly look at what the criteria are over there, these various legal instruments, and These legal instruments basically afford protection for a certain period of time when we talk in the context of IPR. So the rights that are given to an IP owner are not perpetual in nature. So we'll also look at what those rights are quickly in this, and also what's the duration of protection. And also we'll look at some exceptions over there wherein you can have certain forms of IPR having perpetual protection. There is a likelihood. So we'll also look at those instruments. So basically covering the nature, what's protected, the concept, and basically the duration of protection is what I'll be quickly looking at when I'm covering the legal instruments for IPR protection over there. And then I move into trademark in detail and copyright in detail. And finally, I just have an example of a particular product wherein you find multiples intellectual property being bundled. So in fact, if you look at the various products across you, maybe the laptop that you may be using, or maybe the mobile phones that you may be using, you'll find that it would encompass multiple IPRs. That means could be trademark, could be patents, could be copyright, all present in a single product. So we'll just quickly look at that. I just want to give also an illustration of that. So this is basically in a nutshell what I would be covering in my today's talk. Now, I intend to cover this in 1 hour and 15 minutes, and then we can open the forum for questions. Meanwhile, if you have any questions in between, you can post it in the chat box. So that also I'll be addressing at the end. So primarily due to paucity of time, it may not be possible for me to answer these questions in between, but we'll have dedicated 15 minutes at the end of my presentation to address the questions or concerns that you have with regards to intellectual property over there. Prior to starting my presentation, just a brief overview of our center. So we are basically an inter-university center for IPR studies based out of Cochin University of Science and Technology. We are an autonomous institution. We have our own governing council, which is chaired by the Honorable Chief Minister of Kerala, and we also have our own executive council, which is chaired by the Honorable Vice Chancellor of Cochin University of Science and Technology. So we are basically a small center. So we started off with the PhD program, which was multidisciplinary in nature. So we had students from commerce background, we had students from humanities, we had students from management. And then we introduced a 5-year integrated dual degree program in 2013. So we started off as Center for IPR Studies in 2003, and then we graduated into an inter-university center in 2010. And 2013, we started this 5-year integrated dual degree program. So this is unique because we also actually enroll students with a non-law background over here. So the intake is 5. So in the case of LLM IP PhD, it's a 5-year program wherein you can opt out after 2 years with an IP degree or an IPR degree. So IP degree is basically for non-law students. So we have students from science and technology disciplines. We have students from humanities and management as well over there. And in the LLM IPR, we have dedicated law students exclusively for LLB graduates. And we also started the 1-year LLM IPR in 2016 with an intake of 15 students. So currently it is 21 students. As ma'am was introducing me, she also mentioned about IPR facilitation cell, which was started in 2015 under my aegis. So we have a small team and myself and there's one more colleague who work in this IPR facilitation cell in addition to our academic activities. So we have facilitated the filing of patent applications in India for various universities in Kerala, which was funded by ICFPRS. So these applications are filed in the name of the state universities. So you can see we have filed about 25 applications. And we also do consultancy services. So consultancy services, we have 2 heads under consultancy services. One is we carry out the novelty search for inventions. Novelty, as you'll come across in my second session, is one aspect or one requirement or one criteria for patentability over there. So we just carry out novelty search to make an assessment whether your invention is novel in the first place or not. If it is deemed novel, we assist them in filing provisional patent applications. So since I am a patent agent, we have also been filing these patent applications for various individuals and institutions.
Hosted by ICAC SXC with 73 participants. Tab, meeting information button to shift tab, leave, Alt plus to shift tab.
So I think someone's microphone may be unmuted, so I request all participants and faculties to kindly mute their microphones. In addition to that, in cases wherein we are not in a position to directly help the people who approach us, we link them to the patent consultants that we have engaged. As you can see on the first bullet point, so that is something that we do through our patent attorneys that we have engaged. The second and third activities, basically we do it directly. So we are involved in the filing, drafting and filing of provisional patent applications. We've also assisted filing of registration of farmers varieties. So we'll look into farmers varieties, also one kind of intellectual property rights. So we'll look into that in my forthcoming slides. In addition to that, we have been providing free counseling to various entrepreneurs and inventors on IP-related matters. Particularly, most of us approach us for queries on acquisition of IPR, in particular more on the aspect of patenting. So we have helped close to 150 plus people over these 5-year period. We have also started consultancy for filing complete applications for invention. So we look at what complete applications are, what provisional applications are, when we discuss the same in today's afternoon session on patents. So moving on to quickly on intellectual property. So you people have heard this term a lot, and these days it's catching up primarily because in academic circles you see that a certain value is added when you're doing awareness programs or training programs on IPR, particularly if you're seeking accreditation from various agencies nationally or otherwise. So intellectual property, as it says, is something that's created intellectually. Intellectually is considered to be intangible. That means you cannot see it, feel it, or touch it, but it exists. So it is something that's created by virtue of human mind. And a creation can be an artwork, a creation can be an invention, a creation can be a logo. So there are different things that you'll be creating. So depending on the kind of creation that you have come up with, the inventions or innovations that you come up with, it would be protected in different kinds of intellectual property. So something that is created by virtue of human mind, which is intangible in nature, even though it is intangible in nature, you always find that it manifests into a tangible product. So for instance, if I'm an author and if I'm writing down something, that is something that is by virtue of my creativity, I may be penning down something. But if it's a book that I may have authored, you find that there are physical copies available. So you can, even though you can touch the book over there, but what goes into creating the book over there, my creativity is intangible in nature. So even though it is intangible in nature, in most cases you find that it may manifest into a tangible product. The outcome would be in the form of a tangible product. So as I said, it's creation of human mind. Likewise, it's an intangible asset. Unlike a physical property like a land or a house, these are also assets because these are disseminated across globe. People read a lot if you're an author, so you have certain rights over your creation. You want others not to free ride on your creativity. So those things are normally considered to be one creation of human mind and considered to be an intangible asset because it's going to have some value. And most of these intellectual properties are protected under sui generis law. That means we have separate laws for protecting these intellectual property. For instance, you have the Patent Act of 1970 for patents. You have the Copyright Act 1957. I'm talking in the context of India for protecting original works of authorship. So depending on the kind of subject matter that you create, you can have protection under it in various laws, provided that there are certain criteria that has to be met by your invention or by your original work. So if that criteria is met, you can always get protection as an IP owner. So someone who's creating or innovating IP over there, if you have created it within the confines or within the boundaries of the various laws or the subject matter, there is a likelihood that you can get a protection by law. Now, most of these intellectual properties are temporary in nature, as I said before in my introduction, that these intellectual properties are protected for a certain period of time, and once that period or duration expires, this falls in the public domain. So, if I have created a work of authorship, that means if I've written down a novel, I will have certain rights over it, the copyright over it for a particular period of time, and once that period expires, anybody is free to actually copy that work and distribute. So I may retain my moral rights over there. That means my authorship must not be affected, but then people can actually commercially start publishing and distributing my work over there without my permission after the period of protection expires over there. So these are temporary in nature. So you can see that I have a rider over here. That means there can be some exceptions. The exceptions are trademark and geographical indications.
Sometimes we can subdivide section. We will write article.
Hello, I think there's someone else. So I request all of you to kindly mute your microphones. So as I said, there can be certain exceptions which wherein your rights may be perpetual. That means you can, as long as you follow certain procedures, that means you pay the renewal fees, and then in the case of trademark, for instance, initially the protection period of protection is for a period of 10 years, and once that period expires, you can further extend it for a further period of 10 years and so on after every 10 years. But the trademarks are normally given for goods or services which are there in trade. So if your product or your trademark for a particular good or services and that particular good or service is not there in the market, it's not being traded for a period of 5 years, then it may not be possible for you to extend the trademark protection. And geographical indication also, initially it is given for a period of protection is given for a period of 10 years if it meets the requirements. And then after 10 years, you can renew it for a further period of 10 years and so on. After every 10 years, you can do that. So those are something that is unique to trademarks and GI, but otherwise all other intellectual property rights come with a period of protection. So for instance, in the case of patents are normally protected for a period of 20 years. So after that period expires, you'll find that anyone is in a position to actually use that invention for commercial purposes. Even in certain situations, we have something called as exceptions to IP rights. So if you are using these IP protected goods or services or inventions or patents, by whatever name you call them, if you're using them for certain uses as a third party, that means as a teacher or as a research scholar, if you're using something that is protected for certain uses, it will not be considered as a violation of the rights of the IP owner over there. So even though as an IP owner I have some rights, but there are certain exceptions to those rights as well. So we'll look into that as well when we discuss about the various forms of IP in this context. Now the important question that you need to ask is why should we protect IP in the first place? So that's something that we frequently talk about. So now, if you look historically, it was deemed necessary to promote innovation and creativity. So once you want to promote an author or maybe an inventor to disclose his invention or to reward his innovation and creativity, there has to be some sort of a mechanism of protection. So if you historically look, people were not willing to disclose their innovation or their creativity primarily under the fear that it would be copied, and then there would be what you would say imitations of that particular, if you're talking about inventions in the market, or there could be pirated versions of a work in the market. So that would actually be a disincentive to an author or an inventor over there. So if you look historically, one of the reasons is that it was for promoting innovation and creativity. primarily as a tool for protecting your investment. And what sort of investment? Intellectual investment. So if you are an author, you may have written down something, or you're a painter, you may have actually drawn an art on a piece of canvas. Or likewise, you may be as an inventor, you may have actually developed an invention over there. So in such cases, you find that there is a intellectual investment involved over there. Financial investment may or may not be there, but intellectual investment would always be there. So there has to be a protection for that. It's only then that it's going to promote innovation and creativity. People would be more and more likely to actually disclose their knowledge. So there would be a dissemination of knowledge. That is also, as I said, one of the major objectives of protecting an IP over there. So unless there is knowledge dissemination, whether it is technical knowledge or otherwise, you'll find that it can actually hamper development over there, right? So more and more people keep their inventions as trade secret, then what would happen is that it would not come into the public domain ever, right? So that's also one of the reasons, if you look historically, that to promote innovation and creativity, people were encouraged to disclose their work in public so that there is knowledge dissemination. And in return, the various countries would protect their intellectual property. So basically, it's what we say a reciprocity or quid pro quo mechanism, wherein on one hand, as an author or as an inventor, you are disclosing your knowledge to the public, and in return, the government is protecting your intellectual property for a particular period of time. And once that period expires, it falls in the public domain, and anyone is actually free to use that particular knowledge over there. So those basically, if you look at the objectives of protecting IP, so knowledge dissemination. Well, in fact, there is, I would say, an exception to this. An exception to knowledge dissemination is, in fact, trade secrets. So for trade secrets in India, we don't have a law, but then they are protected under various contracts. So you find that trade secrets are something wherein knowledge dissemination is not there. So you keep the knowledge as secret or as confidential. So in some fields, it may be possible that people still keep secrets at trade to protect their commercial interest, because as I said, most of these intellectual properties are temporary in nature. For trade secrets, you can have a perpetual protection provided the information or the trade secret is not leaked in the public domain, or someone is not independently developing whatever is under protection in a trade secret. So the risk is with trade secret is that if someone independently develops something that's under a trade secret regime, you'll find that they will not have any advantage. There are risks associated with everything, but then in the case of IP, you are being encouraged to disclose your knowledge, and then in return, you are getting a protection for a certain period of time. Talking about the benefits, why should you protect? Maybe talking about, I talked about the social rationale in the previous slide, and over here I'm talking about the economic benefits over there. Basically, as I said, most of these intellectual property rights, in fact, give you a monopoly over your work or your invention, and so you can always seek higher returns if you have a monopoly over there. So that's one of the benefits that you find. It acts as a market protection tool, because since you have a monopoly, you can prevent others from using your particular IP. And likewise, if you have gained protection for your IP, you can prevent others from violating your rights over there for a certain period of time, right? So that's the kind of benefit that you can have when we talk in the context of economic terms. Revenue generation. So just like any other physical property or tangible property that we have, for instance, if you have a land or a house, there are ways in which you can monetize it, right? So depending on your requirements. So if you have a house, you can maybe in a position you can rent it out, or you can say you can sell your property or sell your house if your requirement is large or you want to buy another property. And if you have gold or jewelry with you, you can pledge it or you can mortgage it in return for an amount of money. So depending on your need and your requirement, you can use any of these revenue generating tools. It's no different in the case of intellectual property rights. But unlike physical property, most of these intellectual property may not have an economic value, because economic value is not one of the criteria in most of these IP to grant patents, or so for granting intellectual property rights. So you'll find that, in fact, there is a study on patents which says that in the US, it says that more than 95% of the patents that have been granted in the US have in fact not been commercialized. Right. So that's something that is differing, or that's a departure from the normal physical property. So your physical property may still have some value over there, even though the value may be on the lower side or it may be on the higher side. It could fluctuate. So depending on the market, there can be variation in the value, but it may not in most likelihood go to a zero value. But in the case of IP, that may be one of the likelihoods. So a patent may not have any relevance once the technology becomes outdated in the market. So once the product is not there, then the patent also may not have any value if such products which are being protected under patents or patented products have become outdated. In this terms, in the intellectual property terms, we don't use terms such as renting out, selling out. Instead, we have other interchangeably used words such as assignments. So assignment is equivalent to selling a property. So once you assign your rights to another individual or to another entity, you actually relinquish all your rights. So it's just like once you sell your property, such as a house or a land, once you sell it, you don't have any rights over it. So assignment is equivalent to selling. The second aspect is licensing out. So licensing is just like renting out your property to someone. So for that particular period of time, the tenant may be the owner, but then once that period expires, the 11-month period expires, property comes back to you. So you have ownership is retained over here, but then in the case of IP, it can be different. There are different kinds of licenses. So since it is outside the scope of this particular presentation, I'm not going to deal. And also, if you have any particular questions on that, we can discuss it at the end of the session. And finally, as I said, mortgaging. In fact, some of these developed nations use patents, granted patents, to provide money in return for pledging that patent. So that even the government of India, if you look at, is actually exploring this option of introducing patents as a tool for mortgage. So you never know, tomorrow if you have a patent, you can approach a bank and seek investment for developing that invention, and pledge this particular patent. So that's also a likelihood in near future. So mortgaging is also on the cards. And then finally, it adds valuation. So valuation can be two kinds. For instance, it can be an economic valuation. So as I said, if you have a huge patent portfolio, you can generate a lot of revenue from that. So that adds value to your company. So if you look at IBM by licensing out the patent portfolio, generate close to $1 billion per year. So that's the annual revenue that they generate from licensing out their patent portfolio. Second, it also adds brand value. That means if you have so many patents to your credit, it always adds brand. Even in the context of academic circles or research institutions, you find that these days this is one adding brand. It's also actually important in securing higher grades in various accreditation that are being followed. So that is, these are one of the two things that you find, because most of these institutes, most of these patents that come out of these institutes or academic institutes may be being maybe filed only primarily for the brand rather than for having some sort of an economic value. So moving on to, just give me a moment. Hope I'm audible to all of you. Allow me to kindly switch off my video for a moment. Okay, thank you. Uh, just a moment, ma'am. Just a moment. I hope I'm audible to all of you.
Yes, sir. I think you can be a bit more louder, sir.
Fine. I'll try out, but then I don't have a very high pitch. It could also be probably because of the headset that I am using. Let me just try out without the headset. Um, okay. So I have just removed my headset. Am I more audible now than previously?
Yes, sir, you are.
Fine. So I was just taking a small water break. So returning back to my presentation, patents are one form of intellectual property rights that protect subject matter such as invention. So if you have created an invention or developed an invention, you can seek protection under patent. So I'll discuss this in detail in my second session. Likewise, even copyright, I have exclusive exclusive slides on copyright and trademark. I'll discuss that when we reach the section on copyright and trademarks respectively. Basically, copyrights protect original work of authorship. As I said, patents protect inventions which are new, involve an inventive step, and possess an industrial application. So those are basically the criteria. Likewise, in the case of copyright, the work has to be original. So there is various categories of works that we'll look at when we are discussing about the copyright in a section that I have on copyright and on trademarks. So trademarks basically protects the various names, signs, the logos, which can be graphically represented. And then novelty over there is not a requirement. So trademarks need to be distinctive and must not cause confusion to the public. And you cannot have trademark for certain what you would say. I would say rather there are certain exclusions for trademarks. So we'll also look at that when we're discussing. So not everything can be protected under trademarks. So likewise, not everything can be protected under patents or copyrights. So every law you'll find there are certain exclusions. So that we'll look at when we discuss about these in detail, these three in detail. So trademarks basically, as I said, protects names, signs, logos that can be graphically represented. It can also protect sound marks or combination of colors and also shapes. Even shapes of goods are something that trademark can actually protect over there. So we'll discuss that, as I said, in detail. So industrial designs is something that I'm not discussing in detail, so I don't have specific slides, dedicated slides for industrial designs and the other two forms that I'll be discussing. So as the name says, this is also a form of IP, and it basically protects the visual appeal of a particular product. So particularly could be a two-dimensional or a three-dimensional design that is applied to an article which has got a visual appeal. So it's basically aesthetics that is being protected over there. And then it has to be applied to an article. So the requirement is it cannot be a normal conventional thing. So you cannot probably claim industrial design protection for a painting over there. So painting would not, even though you're using a canvas would not actually qualify as an article. So designs have to be applied to articles. So article could be, for example, could be a flower vase, could be furniture, could be these various designs of cars that you find. So these are basically protected under industrial designs. And then what are the criteria or requirement under industrial designs basically? So when I say that industrial designs are protected, the main requirement is that industrial designs must be new or it must be original. So new is if you're applying a new design to a particular article, not applied to that particular article anywhere in the world, then it is considered to be new to any kind of an article. So if there is a particular design that you have applied to a flower vase or maybe to a sofa set over there, and if it has not been applied anywhere in the world, then it is considered to be new over there. Or the second requirement is that it has to be original. So either it has to be novel or it has to be original. So there is a likelihood that there may be existing a design on one article. So for instance, if the design is existing on a flower vase, or let's take it is existing on a particular sofa set. Now you have used the same design and you're applying it to a flower vase. So when you're applying this design to a flower vase, it will not be new, but it can be original because it's a subsequent application of that design to another article. So that's when we say something is, it may not be novel, but it can be original because it's being applied for the first time to an article. So novelty or originality, and then it has to be um, it has to be different from, or you can clearly distinguish these designs from what is existing. So if I'm applying a design to a flower vase, so I look at all the existing designs applied to these flowers. So my design has to be unique over there, and it has to be distinctly clear. So there cannot be only minor variations which may suggest that there is a similarity over there between those designs. Unless there is a distinctness between these my design that I'm trying to seek protection over what is already existing in that particular article, I may not be in a position to overcome this objection. So basically, those are the requirements of industrial designs. And as I said, industrial designs are protected initially for a period of 10 years. So please understand, I'm reiterating once again that I'm talking in the context of India. So even if I don't mention it anywhere, please understand these laws that I'm discussing over here are specifically implemented in India. So in the case of industrial designs, initially the period of protection is for a period of 10 years. Which can be extended by another period of 5 years. So a minimum, that means a total a period of 15 years is what you can protect your design from being copied. So you get basically a copyright in the design once it has been registered. That means if your design meets all those requirements that we discussed, you will be given protection or you'll be given a copyright over that particular design for a period of, initially for a period of 10 years, which can be extended by a further period of 5 years. So in total, you will have 15 years of extension. So those further extensions, you'll have to pay the fees, whatever fees is designated over there. So whenever we talk about renewal or extension, you need to understand that it is you have to pay certain fees to actually maintain that particular intellectual property. Geographical indications, moving on to this next form of IPR. So whenever we talk about geographical indications, this is a unique form of intellectual property right, primarily because this is collectively owned. So if you look at all other forms of intellectual property right, they're privately owned or are private property. That means it would either be held by an individual or by a legal entity. Geographical indications are normally owned collectively. That means could be by a society, could be by societies that have been registered. Primarily, you find these societies. We have even seen some of these being registered by agricultural universities. So there are agricultural products that have been registered by these agricultural universities. So you have various entities that can register these geographical indications, but as collective property. And if you have to use that geographical indication, you have to be a registered user. So that means you have to be a member of that community or you have to be a member of that society to be able to use that that particular GI. So GIs, as the name says, are primarily referring to goods which have a particular quality or a certain characteristics by virtue of being grown in a particular geography or location. So, for example, in Kerala, you'll find there are so many of these GIs. Can anyone actually quickly point out one of the GIs in Kerala? I believe you have people from across India for this particular session, or is it only exclusively we have participants from only Kerala, ma'am?
So we have participants across India.
Okay. So GI, so in Kerala, you have something called as Aramula Kannadi. You have Vadakulam pineapple. So Vadakulam pineapple is acquiring this particular taste or characteristic taste by virtue of being grown in this Vadakulam area of Ernakulam. So the soil, the weather, and the water, all these conditions contribute to the particular taste of Vadakulam pineapple. So if you are growing that Vadakulam pineapple in some other area other than Vadakulam, it may not acquire that taste. So basically, you find that these always would refer to a particular geographical location. Either they are being grown or are being made there. For example, if I'm talking about Vadakulam pineapple, it is something that is grown over there. Then you look at Aramula Kannadi. So Aramula Kannadi is basically a metal mirror, which is made out of one of the ingredients of the metal mirror is the sand that is obtained from Aramula, which imparts this mirror-like properties to this Aramula Kannadi or Aramula mirror as it is said. So whenever you talk about GI, you will always find that it's prefixed by the particular geography. So if I'm talking about Aramula Kannadi, Aramula is a place in Kerala wherein you find this mirror being sold. Likewise, Vadakulam is an area in Ernakulam. Well, there are exceptions to this thing also. For example, Basmati rice. Basmati is not a region in India. And Basmati rice has been registered by 7 states under the various regions. So whenever you are claiming protection under GI, you have to specify the geography or the map in which you may be growing or making these goods over there. So Basmati is an exception or a misnomer, primarily because it does not denote a region. But then rice that are grown in these 7 states acquire that particular taste by virtue of being grown in that particular weather, the soil. So all these things contribute to the quality or the characteristics of Basmati rice. So basically, that's in a nutshell what the requirements are. So the rights over there is that you can prevent unauthorized users from using a GI work. So unless you are an authorized user, so authorized user would be someone who would be part of the community, and you have to get separate registration also under the GI Act as a registered user or an authorized user over there. So anyone who is not authorized would be infringing these rights, and they can you can actually initiate infringement action against them. Right. So GI initially is protected for a period of 10 years, as I said before. And then it can be further extended by another 10 years and so on and so forth. That means initially it's for a period of 10 years, but it can be perpetual, provided every 10 years you are paying the renewal fees for that particular GI and extending it. Now, moving on to the next form of IP. So I have used an acronym over here. So this basically expands to protection of plant variety and farmers' rights. So PPV and FR. So if you have developed a new variety as a farmer or maybe as a botanist, you may have developed a new variety. So such varieties are normally protected under protection of plant variety and farmers' rights. So it's not necessary that you always develop a new variety. It can also be something that is already existing. That's when we call it as an extant variety. However, there are certain exclusions. For example, not on all plant varieties that are available in India, you can get a protection for them. So there are certain exclusions over there. So only the ones which have been notified by the plant variety board you can get, or you can seek a protection if you develop new variety of such a plant. Right. So those are basically the exclusions. And the criteria for obtaining protection for a new or an extant plant variety over there is that for new variety, there are 4 requirements: novelty, distinctness, uniformity, and stability. So novelty, as I said, in the context of plants, it is the commercial availability. So that means if you are selling that particular plant variety in the market, within 1 year of the commercial sale, you must actually take protection, or you must have applied for protection of such a plant variety by filing the necessary forms and paying the necessary fees. Only there are certain exceptions with regards to farmers' rights. So farmers are not required to pay any fees for application, but they have to definitely file these applications to various agencies, either through themselves, or even there's a facility wherein it can be filed by other people who have been authorized by the farmer if he is not educated over there. So moving on to these requirements of novelty, as I said, it is commercial novelty. That means it must not be there in the market, and if it's there within 1 year of such availability, you must have filed an application for protection of plant variety. There are exceptions to this. For example, there are varieties which were already there in the market prior to the enactment of this act. So this act was enacted in 2001. So if there is any new variety that you may have developed prior to this, that are called as extant varieties. So for them, you may not have a timeline. Those timelines are fixed by the government because they notify certain crops under the gazette, and once it is notified, if such a plant variety is the one which you are developing, then you have a certain time period within which you have to file that application. So it could be 2 years, it could be 6 years. So within that time period, once it's been notified, you can file an application. So it will not have an impact on novelty. And for extant varieties, novelty is definitely not a requirement over there. So it only requires that you normally call it as DUS, distinctness, uniformity, and stability is what you have to show for your plant variety over there. So moving on to distinctness, you have to show that at least one of these characteristics of the variety that you have developed must be different from the existing variety. So if I've developed a new rose variety, let's assume I've developed a new color, maybe a velvet color or something that is not there already. So then when we are comparing my particular variety for which I'm seeking protection with the existing varieties of rose, this particular color that I'm claiming to be essential must in fact be different, or it must not be existing before. So that's when we call it to be a distinct. And the next requirement is uniformity. So if I have developed this particular purple variety of rose, all my flowers should be of the same color. So I must not actually end up with a flower with purple, and then I have another flower with pink color on the same plant. So that's when we talk that this your characteristic that you're claiming to be unique is not uniform across the species. And moving on to the last requirement of stability. So whenever we talk about stability, what we are looking at is when you're further growing this, that means the next generation of the plants also must retain these essential characters. So in the first generation, all my flowers had this violet or purple color that I was discussing. But when in the second generation, I found that there was a mixture of colors of flowers I obtained. So there it will not be considered to be stable over there. So then you will not get protection. So you have to meet all these requirements. Only then will it be protected under as a new variety or as an extant variety or as a farmer's variety. So farmer's variety and extant variety, novelty is not a requirement, but all other requirements have to be met. So that is normally what they do is once you submit a particular sample of this seed or whatever part of plant you have, they will grow it for at least 2 cycles in most of these cases. In the case of trees and vines, it may be just 1 cycle, and they will test whether whatever you are saying is correct. So once they test it on the field, only then will a protection be given to your plant variety. So you have 2 categories, trees and vines, for which period of protection is more than the normal crops that you have, plant varieties. Exclusions, as I said, only the ones which have been notified by the government, you can claim protection. The others are excluded. So not all plant varieties can be protected under this act. Okay, so quickly moving on to trademarks. Fine. So I think I have about 25 minutes. Right. So these are some of the things that you'll come across. So you may recall that in one of my earlier slides when we are discussing, in fact, in the previous slide when we are discussing about these various forms of IP, I was specifically mentioning that trademarks are for protecting these various names, signs, or logos. So you can find that this particular symbol that you look at my screen, as you're aware, is for McDonald's. So just by looking at the symbol, you can identify it to be a particular brand, or it's in the food business, and they sell these basically these proprietary products in their chain of restaurants. Could be symbols such as this. As you're aware, this is of Mercedes-Benz, and likewise this particular symbol when a dancing horse or a prancing horse points to a Ferrari, you identify it to a Ferrari brand. It can also be a word such as Ford. You know that Ford Motors is also into automobiles. So on one hand, you have these different symbols which are identifying a particular product, that means a good or a service. Likewise, it's also distinguishing these products from one another. So Mercedes, Ferrari, and Ford, all of them are automobile manufacturers. But you see, just by looking at these signs or these symbols, you are clearly in a position to recognize and differentiate them from other brands. So that's one of the requirements that we normally find over there. We'll discuss that in my forthcoming slides. It can also be a letter such as GM representing General Motors, or it could be a phrase such as just do it along with the logo pointing to Nike. Sound mark. This is basically the MGM sound mark, wherein this lion roars over there. So you find MGM pictures. You'll find at the starting you have this lion roaring. So that's a sound mark, and that's also a category of trademarks. Now, trademarks are given for goods as well as services, which are either existing in the market, or they may be potential goods that may be introduced in the market later on after protection of the trademark. So it can be goods as I highlighted, and it can also be services such as Tata Consultancy Services and Blue Dart. So these are logistic providers. So these may not have products, but they may be providing services for these particular brands over there. By Blue Dart, for instance, is known for transporting these various goods across India or even internationally. Tata Consultancy Services, as you're aware, is one of the top ranks of the industry in India, which is providing various services, consultancy services to various clients across the globe. They may also be there with the products, but primarily their business, as you're aware, is providing services. Now, as I said, it can also be the shape that can be trademarked over here. So you can see the shape of this Coca-Cola bottle was in fact trademarked. It can be a combination of colors. You see Google, you see each alphabet has got a different color. So this also can be subject matter. Likewise, Apple, this is in fact, you see represents this particular giant Apple. That means there are various electronic products in the market. So even though it is a fruit, but as you're aware that these company does not sell fruits over here. So this is particularly distinguishing them, or what you would say, it's not describing a particular category. So we'll look into the requirements in my forthcoming slide. Right. So as I said, now within trademarks, you also have something called as certification marks. So these are given to group or a community which would be meeting that particular requirements that have been set forth by the certifying bodies over there. For example, Woolmark. So there may be different companies which may be using this mark, Woolmark over there, or even FSSAI or BIS. So all those companies that follow these standards, or the standards that are prescribed by these standard setting organizations, you find can use these particular logos or these particular marks on their products. So this is not restricted to a particular individual or an entity. It can be used by all those entities who meet those standards. Right. Likewise, you also have collective marks such as these Coffee Kenya or Tamil Nadu Handloom Seal. So if you are registered under this, and if you're manufacturing these goods in Tamil Nadu as cotton, as handmade cotton, then you can always use these marks on your products over there. So it's kind of a geographical indication over there, but we cannot call them, because geographical indication is more focused on quality over there. Whereas in trademarks, quality is not a requirement for seeking protection over there. Could be reputation, in fact, one of the reasons under which you can seek protection. There's one more category of trademarks which are known as well-known marks. Well-known marks are the marks which may be well-known in India, or it could also be not in India but known elsewhere to people using such goods or services. So, for instance, if I use Mercedes car, or I'm a consumer using a Mercedes Benz car, So in that case, even if it is not registered in India, as a consumer using that particular good, I'm aware that yes, it is well known to automobile users over there, or these niche segment of people who use these premium cars over there. So they're well known, aware of this, or even other people also are aware what this brand is. So it's not necessary that everyone should be aware of it, but at least the people who are using such goods or services or receiving such services must be aware that it is well known to them. In this case, registration or use is not mandatory. So it's not mandatory that you get a trademark registered if you have to prove that it is well known. So it can be its use or its registration could be in any other country. For instance, if Mercedes did not register the mark in India, they did it in some other country. So since it is well known, then registration is not mandatory for them to enforce their rights, or even the use is not mandatory. So as I mentioned before, it is not necessary that it has to be well known to the public at large. So not every person should know that what Mercedes pertains to, but only those people who use such products, if it is well known to them, it will be considered as a well-known mark. Now, there is this interesting case of Benz versus VIP over there in 1993, wherein, as you can see on the right-hand side, I have this VIP Benz logo. So VIP is one who manufactures these undergarments, and they had in fact introduced this product in the market, wherein they were using, as you can see, the name and the logo. So the name, you have Benz over here, which is matching with the Mercedes Benz, and even the logo, if you look at the person, it is identical to what is encircled over there. So they were kind of copying this particular imitation and showing that it has Benz over there. So they were selling this particular undergarments, and it was held to violate the name as well as logo of Mercedes. So this Mercedes Benz, the name as well as the logo was registered in India. And since VIP was using the name Benz as well as this particular logo, which represents or equivalent to the logo that's used by Benz, it was held to infringe, and they were refrained from using the name and the logo. So they had to withdraw their product from the market. Now, quickly looking at the requirements of trademark over there. As I said before, it has to be distinctive. That means you must clearly be in a position to distinguish these marks or the name within the same category of goods. So novelty is not a requirement in the context of trademarks. So you have basically 46 classes of goods and services. So whenever you're seeking a registration in trademark, you must register it at least in one category. So you can register it in multiple categories. So each category would be representing a particular trade over there, right? So if you have come up with an agricultural good, it may be covered in a one particular class. Likewise, if you have come up with an electronic good, it would be in a different class of products. So likewise, you have classes even for services. So you're not into producing goods or you're not trading goods, but you're trading services over there. For them also, you have separate classes. So in total, these are covered in the 34 classes, which are uniformly applied across all countries that follow this. So novelty is not a requirement. That means you can have the same name for different products. For example, Surya is there for Surya television, and then you find Surya bulbs as an electronic good. So as in an entertainment field, you'll find Surya is recognized as a television channel, but in an electronics, you recognize Surya to be an electronic product. That means bulbs or tubes. So these are manufactured or sold by two different people. So it's not Sun TV which is selling Surya bulbs, or it is not Surya bulbs or electronics which is actually running this Sun television. So you can have the same name for different products. Even Indica, you have Indica for a car, you have Indica for a dye. So novelty is not a requirement, but within the same category in which you are trying to seek protection, there you must show that it is different. So you probably cannot have a registration for Nike with a double E or Reebok with the 3 E's in between. So those things are not allowed actually for trademark protection. So it must be graphically representable. So you must be in a position to write it down on a piece of paper. That's what you mean. Could be draw it, or you could draw it on computer, anywhere, software, and then take a printout. So something that can be graphically represented. Even in the case of the sound mark, you have to actually write down the notes over there for that particular sound mark over there. You must avoid confusion. So that's what I said. It must not be deceptively similar. So I gave you an example. If you're trying to get a registration for Nike with an extra E, so one, it would be deceptive or it would be confusing to the public. So when you are quickly looking at this product of Nike with a double E, with that of a single E, you may actually, if it is even the logo is similar, you may get confused at first instance that it may be of Nike and Nike. And if it's an uneducated person, he may believe that it may be Nike just by looking at the logo over there. So such things which are creating confusion in the mind of consumers are not protected under trademarks. It has to be distinctive. It must avoid confusion. And you cannot have trademarks for descriptive products or generic products. For example, Xerox is one such example. So Xerox, in fact, if you look historically, was name of a machine which was used for photocopying. So now it has actually become very generic over there. So you cannot register a name such as Xerox over there because it has become generic and is associated with all the goods. And something that is describing the nature, the quality of a good, you cannot get a protection under trademark. So as I said, if Apple tomorrow starts selling apples in the market, then they cannot get protection for Apple in that particular category of agricultural products as apples, right? For selling apples. So such things wherein you're describing the nature, the quality of a particular product, such things also cannot be protected under trademarks. I hope I'm audible to all of you.
Yes, sir. You are.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So normally we have this issue with online sessions. So you're just looking as a presenter, you're just looking at the screen and you can see only yourself and the screen over there. So I normally in between I prompt just to check whether I'm there with all of you or not. So please respond. So moving on to exclusion. So we discussed what in the previous slide, what could be protected as trademarks. Now we also look at certain exclusions. So these exclusions, if your subject matter falls in this particular category, then a trademark will not be given for that. That's what it means that these cannot be protected. So if you have a registered GI, you cannot use that as a trademark. So you cannot register a GI which is already registered as a trademark as an authorized user over there. So that is not allowed. In some circumstances, it may still be possible. Now you have come up with a trademark which is anti-religious, so that also are actually not allowed as subject matter. So that may affect the sentiments of religious things. Scandalous materials or obscene materials cannot be trademarked, not considered to be immoral over there. Emblems also, for instance, certain government names or emblems are not subject matter of trademarks. And now as a trademark owner, you have certain rights over there. For instance, if you have got a trademark registered in your name, you have rights to exclusively use that trademark. Likewise, if someone is actually infringing your rights, that means if someone is, as I said, I gave you an example of Nike, someone is selling an imitated version or a duplication of Nike over there, you can prevent them from using your trademark. So you have, as an owner, you can initiate infringement suit against them. So infringement is nothing but violation of your right. So if I have to give you an analogy, it's just like someone is trespassing your property. So you say trespassers will be prosecuted in the context of physical property. In the case of intangible property, we normally call it as an infringement. Even though there also it's normally called as an infringement, but then infringement is basically a legal term when someone is violating your rights. So you have a right to sell your property, right? So if you're owner of a particular property, you have a right to sell it. So even in the case of trademarks, it is not different over here. So, and then if you want to have a correction in your trademark or you want to make alterations in the register of the trademark, that also are construed as your rights as a trademark owner over there. Now moving on to copyrights. So you see that normally copyright is represented by this C within a circle. So this represents C. So you come across this across various television serials or maybe various these these days you have these OTT platforms, or even films that this symbol appears frequently when it is being shown or being exhibited either on the small screen or on the large screen over there. So it represents that yes, this particular work that is being displayed is protected under copyright. Now, copyright, as I said before, are given for original works of authorship. So there are various categories that have been defined for works in the context of copyright. The first category is literary work. So, for example, uh, books or novels, something that you have written down, normally categorized as a literary work. It also includes the software programs, because as you're aware, software programs also are written down primarily in English language, and then they are translated so that it can be read by the computer. So those also form under the category of literary works over there. So could be something that you have written down as a novel. Now it could also be for a cinematographic film. So that is another category of work. So normally here, the producer of the film is it's considered to be the owner. Even the authors may be different. So director could be an author. Likewise, someone who has scripted or who has written down the story for that movie could be an author. Music director is an author over there. So there are these various works that combine together to form a movie, right? So integral part of that. So individually, these may have copyright over them. That means authors such as music directors or even the actors have as performers have got certain rights. All these rights are combined and are actually assigned to the producer over there of the films. So you may be as an author, you may be the first owner, but then you may be transferring your rights to somebody else who would become the eventual owner of that. So since you have created the work, you have the first ownership, but later on, the ownership may be transferred to a third party or to someone else over there. Musical works is another category. So if you have developed a music, if you have created a music, that could fall under the category of musical works. A part of it is normally also covered in literary works. For example, the notations or the graph that you draw are normally covered under literary works, but the music that you create forms part of the musical works. Likewise, you have artistic works. So that's another category of another category of copyright that works over there. Artistic works. So could be a painting, could be a sculpture. Likewise, so all those things, even architecture. If you have an architectural drawing, that also forms under the category of artworks over there. Right. So apart from that, you also have dramatic works, and you also have we have discussed literary, dramatic, musical, artistic works, and cinematographic films. In addition to that, there are something called as related rights. That's for performers. So performers can be singers or could be actors of cinematographic films or serials. So even they have certain rights. I believe I lost two people. Am I there? I had some issues with my net connection. Am I audible?
You're audible, sir. Sound is slightly breaking. Maybe net issues are there.
I had some net issues, ma'am. Now, is it clear? I've just tried to reduce the distance between myself and the laptop.
You are clear, sir.
I'm actually using my, yeah, I don't have a stable connection over here, so that could be one of the issues as well. So basically, these are the various categories of works that I was discussing. In addition to that, as said, we have performers' rights, and we also have rights of broadcast organizations. So someone who is recording this music or who's recording this film, they have certain rights over there, even though they may not be creating the work originally. But since there is an investment over there, economic investment over there, they are as part of the copyright fraternity or owners, are considered to be copyright owners. But then the duration of protection is much less that is given to these category of works, such as performers or to broadcasting organizations, like even cinematographic films. So we'll look into that duration of protection. I have a slide exclusively on that. So what are the requirements of copyright? First, that it has to be qualified as a work. Second, the work must be original. So it must not have been copied from somewhere else or a substantial portion of it copied. So you are not actually, doing something we call as mosaicing. So you cut copy paste from 50 documents and say that it is an original work. So that also will not actually be called as an original work over there. So original work is something that's, if you're an author, it's coming out of your own imagination or of your own creativity. The words that you are coming up is something that's your own over there. So that's major requirement for the original work. And the duration of protection is type of author plus 60 years or in the context of India. So if you authored a work when you were 25 and if you die at the age of 30, at the age of 80, so then you have got 55 years of protection over there plus 60 years after your death. So you may have 115 years protection. So even after your death, your family member enjoy your copyright of the work that is existing. So we are talking in the context of India. It is applicable to all categories apart from cinematographic films and performers' rights. So in the case of cinematographic films, it is 50 years from when the film is actually released. If it is not released, also I think there is a date which is 50 years. Likewise, in the case of performers, also it's for 25 years that they have protection from the day when that particular, whether it's a movie or a television serial that has been released over there. So those are the duration of protection that is available. So you see 60 years is for literary, dramatic, musical, and artistic works. For all other work, it is either 50 years or 25 years. Now you have a bundle of rights in the context of copyright. So it can be an economic right and normally categorized as either economic rights or moral rights. So economic rights is something that you can transfer to people, whereas moral rights are something that are not transferable in the context of India. So you may have, as an author, you have certain rights to retain your name. So no one is actually replacing your name with their name. So that's what we talk about in the context of moral rights. Second, we also have something that people are not in a position. I'll discuss about moral rights because I have a slide on that in the next. And there's one more thing that is very interesting about copyright is you have a work and expression dichotomy over there, idea expression dichotomy. So you don't get copyright protection for an idea unless it is expressed. So expression could be in the way of writing it down, by way of recording it down. So if you have something in your mind and you have stored it over there, that would not be protected in the copyright. So unless you have put it down into some medium over there, that you cannot gain protection over there. So that's normally called as an idea expression dichotomy over there. Something that's unique to copyright is the registration is optional, so it is not mandatory for you to register, but it is always advisable, particularly when high stakes are involved. For example, films, in the case of films, you find that they get their work registered prior to release of the film because they would like to enforce the rights if someone is actually coming up with pirated versions of the movie on the net, right? So that's when registration would play an important role over there, but it is not mandatory. So if you have created an original work, the date is created, you become owner of that work. But advisable to get it endorsed by the copyright board over there so that they also endorse that your work is original. Now, these are the exclusions, some of the exclusions, in fact, not all of them. So if there is a single word, can you get a copyright for a single word? Well, that is not possible. Even for titles or 2 or 3 sentences, it's not possible to get a copyright. Slogans or even for certificates, can you get actually copyright over there? So these are normally considered to be very general over there, and it's not capable of being considered, even though it may be original in some cases, but then it's considered to be very general and not given what you would say are not copyrightable in the first instance. Now, certain categories of work, for example, if there is an artistic work, there is a chance that it may actually occur or there may be an overlap with trademark over there, because as I said, trademark also gives protection to logos. So if you have created logo under copyright also, so there is a possibility. But if something can be protected as a trademark, then there is less likelihood of that being given protection under copyright. So if one, that it has to be an artistic work, and then there is a likelihood of both trademark and copyright protection possible. So in such cases, copyright will not be given. Government logos or emblems, similar as we discussed in the previous case. If the government is applying for it, it may still be possible. But if there's an individual applying for it, unless he is authorized by the government, you will not get a protection for. Okay, I think I'm almost done. Then moving on to the rights. So if you are a copyright owner, you have certain rights over this. So please try to differentiate between authors and owners over here. So authors are the first owners, but author may not always be the owner over there. For example, if in the academic circles, if I have to talk, if you have written down or if you have submitted a manuscript for publication in a journal, so you have written down everything. So you are the author over there. But once a paper is accepted, you always find that there is this copyright form that you have to sign over there. You'll be transferring all your rights to the copyright or the publisher over there. So whatever, whether it's Elsevier or whether it's Taylor and Francis, whichever it is, once it is accepted, unless you sign the copyright form, they'll not actually publish your work. So you are transferring, even though you're the first owner, you are transferring your rights to the publisher over there. He becomes the ultimate owner of the work. So later on, if you have to actually get a own copy of your work, or maybe get normally you get a copy of your e-copy of your work, but if you want to get that particular journal, a physical copy of that, you will have to end up paying money, unless your university subscribes or your institute subscribes to it, that you will have to end up paying money to acquire a copy of your own publication in certain situations. So that's the kind of irony that exists when you're talking about copyright authorship and ownership. So as an owner, you have rights. The rights are, you can prevent others from copying your work. So it could be a literary work, could be a dramatic work, musical, artistic works. And you can also prevent them from publishing your work. So once you're reproducing it, the next step would be publishing it. So publication also can be prevented. Likewise, distribution. So once you've published it, you would also like to distribute it in the market. So that also is one of the rights that you have. You can exclude others from using it. Making it available online, if someone is making it available online without your permission, that also is a violation of your economic rights. Likewise, you have translations or adaptations. So if there is a literary work that's originally written down in Malayalam, now someone is translating that work without the permission of the owner, the publisher, or the author, then in such cases that would be considered as a violation. Adaptation. So if you're adapting a novel into a movie, for example, Harry Potter series, initially it was published as a novel, and then later it was adapted into a cinematographic film. So such kind of adaptation also requires the permission of the copyright owner. So basically, these are the bundle of rights that you have as a copyright owner. And moral rights, as we discussed, could be the right of paternity, could be the right of integrity. So right of paternity is that you are entitled to the name to be mentioned or to be recognized as an author of that particular work. So if someone is replacing your name with their name, that would be violating your rights over there. Right of integrity is trying to change the meaning of your work. So if as an author you have written down something and someone else is actually making edits to that particular work over there without your permission, and is changing the meaning of that work, then that would actually violate the rights of integrity over there. So these are basically the moral rights. These are not transferable, and this will also exist once the copyright expires in a work. So these are kind of, as we said, are irrevocable, and these are perpetual in nature. Plagiarism, I think, as you are aware, this is one of the burning issues that you normally face in academics, and it's being academic dishonesty is currently being pursued, or is being viewed as I would say, rather being looked upon more stringently by these these various agencies that are monitoring or regulate these activities such as UGC and also. It's basically an academic dishonesty, plagiarism, and it involves using someone else's works as your own. And it includes various kinds of plagiarism. We'll look into that in my forthcoming slide. So you are using someone else's work without acknowledging them would be construed as plagiarism over there. It's not necessary that it has to be a copyright should be existing over there, even if the copyright has expired for such a work. If you are copying it for the purpose, then that would be considered as plagiarism. Now you'll find plagiarism of ideas. That means you may have discussed your idea with somebody and that guy actually copies it. So even though there is no copyright violation over there, because you may recall that ideas per se are not copyrightable. It's only the expression. So if you had written it down somewhere, then that would be considered as a copyright violation if it is original work. If you're just discussing it with somebody, you'll find that even though it is not an infringement, but then it is definitely a violation of the moral rights over there because someone else is using your ideas that you may have discussed with them. So that are called as plagiarism of idea that's not been expressed. Then you have ideas which may have been expressed, but then these are not being acknowledged over there. Right? So it would definitely, if you don't acknowledge a particular work and if a third party is reading it, you would believe that you have actually authored that and then you have not taken it from some other source. Without citation, is that what we mean? Clones and ghostwriting. So you see this often. A lot of students get their project works done by paying cash, either through the online mode or through some other agencies. That's normally called as ghostwriting. So you're writing for someone in return for some money that you may be taking over there. Copying significantly one particular source without acknowledging is also a plagiarism of expression. And word switching is paraphrasing. So if you're doing just you're changing the synonyms over there, or you're using synonyms of these words by copying these articles or paragraphs, that also is not going to actually deem your work to be original. It would still be considered as plagiarized over there. Right? So you have to import your own meaning into the particular sentence or particular paragraph by your own interpretation. So all these are various forms. Paraphrasing a single document, as I said before. Mashup is nothing but mosaicing, as I said. So you take 50 documents, you copy 50 paragraphs and compile them as one without doing anything. So the only labor that you have done over there is to copy and paste this from different parts of the document. So that also is not going to confer originality and will be considered as plagiarism over there. So that's what is mashup. And remixing is you're taking these 50 documents in the previous example that I gave, and now you're trying to paraphrase them. So paraphrasing is just you're using probably using the synonyms to construe the same meaning more or less, right? All of them without citation will always be considered as a violation of would be considered plagiarist work. So for plagiarism, always remember cite the author. In some cases, you may also have to take permission from the author. Mention particularly where you have taken it. And if you're using it as such, maybe use it in inverted commas. But then there are limitations on what sort of data you can use and to what extent can you use it. So whether it's 5% that would be considered, whether it is 10% that would be considered as plagiarist work, would depend. So in such cases, use it under quotations and then try to explain what it means over there. So always cite, acknowledge the author, and then import your own meaning into the document that you're trying to create. Now coming up with my last slide on various IPRs that you normally find in a single product. So I've taken this example of an Audi car. So you see there is the logo of Audi on the right hand corner that is protected in the trademarks. Then you can see there is this engine at the right bottom corner. So that would be a subject of the patents. And then the design of the car, as you can see on the image, that could be part of the industrial designs. Likewise, any brochures of this particular product or any advertisement of this particular model, that would be subject of copyright. So you find that there are different forms of IPR existing in a single product. So that's a kind of existence, even though you may be using these products or these various IPs, you may be consumers of these IPs, but you may not be noticing them, in your daily use over there. But then they do exist, or are present everywhere. Only thing is that you are not conscious about its existence. Well, thank you all for your attention. And if you have any queries on IPR, you can contact me on this mobile number, or you can email me to this particular email ID. Website, currently we have some issues with your website, so you can contact me on this. So with this, I'll stop sharing my screen, and I'm open for questions.
Dear participants, the session is open for discussion. We had a very beautiful session on IPR and a very beautiful outlook about what it means and what are its important applications in our regular life. So now the session is open for discussion. Either you can directly unmute and have the query, or you can put your queries in the chat box.
Okay, I see there are some examples in the chat box, the GI. But as such, I don't find any questions. But yes, if you have any questions, you can unmute your microphone and you can actually.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, sir.
So, my question is related to vaccine. So
Related to?
we are in a pandemic situation. Vaccine. So
Okay,
what are the
vaccine.
IPR related to vaccine?
Can you just repeat
And
your question, sir?
my question related to the same thing. So what are the IPRs that are related to
Vaccines. Okay, that's a good question. Well, vaccines. Yeah.
And one more thing. One more thing. And if a company gets the patent of vaccine, can the government stop that patent in between for the general welfare of the society?
Okay. Fine. So to answer the first part of your question, or the first question regarding what are the IPs that are associated with vaccines, one is patents. As you're aware of, you did mention that patents, if they are available for vaccines, how are you going to deal with it? So any vaccine, in Indian context, we normally talk of patents as product patents or process patents. So there could be a new vaccine that you may have developed, and it may be patented as a vaccine product over there, or it could be a technology such as these days you hear about the mRNA technology. So that also could be subject of a patent. So those are normally called as platform technologies. So patents for vaccines can be product or process patents. Likewise, other forms of IP, trade secret or know-how. So one of the issues with vaccines is, even if you have the information pertaining to patents, because patents, as I'll be discussing even in my second session, is that after 18 months, the application gets published. So you can have those information, the technical information available to the public after 18 months. But in the case of trade secrets or know-how, these remain confidential, and this is there only with the companies. And there are certain cell lines as well. So it's not just the information, but also these products which may be required for developing these vaccines, which are available with these companies. So these are proprietary information or proprietary products which are not forming part of the patents. So one is patents, second is your know-how, as well as these products such as cell lines, which are protected under IP. in vaccines, other forms that you find, for example, industrial designs are not something that would be existing in vaccines. Copyright also may not be one of the problems that may be associated with vaccines, but patents and IP, particularly patents and the technical know-how or trade secrets are going to be very key, blocking, I would say, rather, or very crucial forms of IP that would decide on the access and availability of these vaccines. Other non-IP related things are the technology, that means the infrastructure. So technological capability is also very relevant in the context of vaccines, but then that is not an IP issue. But primarily, these are know-how and patents that in fact uh, can be these forms of IP that may be associated with vaccines. Copyright may not be blocking, even though it may be there. There could be publications that would form part of copyright. Industrial designs in the context of vaccines, I don't see it as a hurdle, but in the case of diagnostics, you normally find that industrial designs also cause a problem. So I'm not sure if you people have heard about the waiver that India and South Africa has jointly submitted to the WTO, wherein we have requested the WTO to waive off certain provisions on copyright, industrial designs, patents, and trade secret, or it's called as an undisclosed information, till this COVID era subsides. So primarily there are these four barriers overall when you look at COVID, but then that's trade secret, patents, copyright, and industrial designs. But for vaccines, the barrier is know-how. So that's key. Now moving on to the second question that you asked pertaining to uh, uh, if a patent is granted for vaccines, or can the government actually prevent the grant of such patents? Well, whether it's the government or the individuals, you can oppose the patent. So it's not necessary that only the government can do that. As an individual, as an individual, you have something called as a pre-grant opposition mechanism in India. So once your patent application is filed by a vaccine company, uh, once it is published, it is normally published after 18 months. So that's we call as a pre-grant publication. We'll discuss that in my second presentation. Once it is published, any person can oppose on the grounds that are specified in Section 25(1) of the Indian Patent Act. So you say that it is not new, it is not novel, or even on grounds of public order or morality, you can oppose them. So the grounds which have been specified in 25(1), you can in fact invoke there as an individual. Even any person can do that. So it need not be a government. And if the patent has already been granted, for instance, for certain medicines, the repurposed medicines such as remdesivir and favipiravir and baricitinib, these are the medicines that are normally prescribed for certain kinds of COVID complications you find. So these have been patented, already patented, because these were not developed initially for COVID, but these were developed for treatment of other diseases. But that they have been repurposed for COVID-19 since they're found to be effective on other kinds of viruses. So in such cases, you can go for revocation. So you have called something as revocation mechanism or post-grant opposition. So once a patent is granted, you can oppose it within 1 year. Or if the 1 year period has elapsed, you can go for revocation. So you can revoke or you can file a revocation petition based on the grounds that are specified in Section 64 over there, or 25(2) of post grant if you're opposing it, if you're opposing it under post grant opposition mechanism. So those are, otherwise the government can also invoke compulsory license, for instance, under public interest. That means emergency. So this is a situation we have a provision on Section 92 which says compulsory license can be issued by the government under extreme urgency or medical cases, extreme urgency or such situations. So COVID is definitely one of these extreme urgent situations in which you can invoke that. Or they can go for, even the patent can be revoked by the government for for public interest. So you have different provisions also for that. So compulsory license is basically issuing a license to a third party without the requirement of permission. So you're not required to take permission. Only you need to give a royalty to the patent owner over there once you start selling the product after receiving the compulsory license. So basically, that's in a nutshell. To answer your question, I believe I may have. To some
Thank you.
extent-
Thank you. Okay, it's
to
clear.
some extent.
There was another query in the chat box about the courses, and it is answered in the chat box itself by the fellow participants.
Mhm. Yeah.
Sir, again, there is a request over there to share the slides 2 and 4 once again.
To and fro from starting. Ma'am, I think you have, you're recording this session. Maybe you
Yeah,
can share
yeah,
it. with the
recording
participants.
is there. Sir, the recording is there, and we are providing the recordings uploaded in the YouTube by evening. So, sir, I think you can
Awesome.
have those slides from there.
Yeah, so I believe that would be because I'm already running short of time, so that's the issue. Then I think one final question I can see is if we copy paste some material for unseen comprehension, will it be copyright infringement? So you mean to say innocent infringement? Well, you can use it as a defense. You can use it as a defense, Madam Neelam, that you didn't know it, but then you say that you are copying and pasting it from somewhere else, right? For unseen comprehension. Will it be copyright infringement? Then
Sir,
can you just be,
yes, sir, I'll explain you. For preparing question paper, we
Hmm.
have to get some material. So sometimes we take it from some articles, from some books. So will
No,
it be
ma'am,
copyright infringement?
no, if you are expressing it in your own words, it's not going
No,
to
no,
be. But
no.
then if you're, yeah, if
You
you're,
are
for
taking it
example,
as it is.
as it is,
As it is. Suppose I want
As-
to give in, suppose I want to give an unseen comprehension, say on
Hmm.
butterflies. So I'll
Uh-huh.
pick up from somewhere, wherever
Hmm.
it is given about butterfly, and then
Hmm.
I set some questions on that. That could be used for question bank, that could be used for question paper, or that could be used for some books also. So will it be copyright infringement?
Well, ma'am, to answer it plain and simply, if you are adding value to that particular work, then it will not be considered as a copyright infringement. But if you are per se, as you said, copying it and pasting it, then it can be an issue over there. But there are some exceptions. For example, we have something called as fair dealing or fair use. So if you're using this work for the purpose of education or for the purpose of teaching, for private use, then it may not still be considered as a copyright infringement over there.
Okay, sir. Because we as English teachers, we always need some articles, and we naturally are preparing questions, so we won't go for writing articles. We copy paste.
Yeah,
it.
I understand. I understand, ma'am. Only thing is maybe you can acknowledge that thing when you're teaching, but while framing questions, if you're doing it for the purpose of education, it's not going to be a problem because if there is a case of DO photocopy, if you can look at that of 2013, 2015, wherein it has said that compiling these courseworks of these various. So I don't know if you people are aware. So Delhi University has this facility wherein, based on the syllabus, they can provide course packs. So this photocopy machines, they use these various books and take the relevant parts and take photocopies of the relevant parts and compile it as a course pack and sell it. So that was not considered to be a violation over there because it was for the purpose of education. So I believe this also will not be probably a violation based on that.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you so
Sir,
much.
sir, I have heard about copy left. Nowadays, somebody copy left. Yeah.
Yeah,
Can you say
yeah.
something about copy left? Recently only I heard about that term copy left.
Well, it's
Please.
there. It's there for some time. So it's more of the liberal approach, wherein one of the manifestations is this open source, right? So you have these even journals. You have open source journals. So open source journals are primarily trying to keep this these things out of the copyright protection. So if as an author I have certain rights, because if I'm creating an original work, it will have copyright protection. But then as an author, I don't want to enforce my rights, or I want to relinquish my copyright over it. That's when we call it as a copy left. So you're creating a work, but then you don't want to claim, you only want to have moral rights. You don't want to have economic rights. So you want that the knowledge is disseminated. So that's when we normally call it as a copy left, trying to keep it outside the purview of copyright protection. So to promote access over there is what the objective is. Yes, that's a good initiative, but then you must understand that most of these publishing industries are based out of these developed nations. So, and they make a lot of money from the article that you're writing, but in return, you don't get anything. So if I've written down an article for scientific journals, what I get in return is probably just a copy of that, and whatever money the publishers make, they don't share it even with the editors or the reviewers. So no one actually gets a part of that. So in such cases, you find there's a huge lobby that would oppose. And copy left it's an initiative wherein you're trying to create works to promote access, so that copyright does not act as a barrier in accessing knowledge or in knowledge dissemination over there.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, I believe there are no further questions, so probably.
So I think we don't have much more questions in the chat box or from anyone. So we conclude this session, and we have the continuation of this session at 2:30. Please note that the session is at 2:30 and not at 3. So please join at least 5 to 10 minutes in advance, and have a great day. Thank you.